Well, good afternoon, everyone. Just joining us. It is right at the top of the hour. We're going to give it maybe 30, 60 seconds to get everyone into the room, and we will be underway. We're so glad you could join us today. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Happy Wednesday. In this case, I'm used to it being Tuesday, but we have a special edition, so a Wednesday edition of the Hunt Institute's Early Efforts web series, a special series that we are delighted to be hosting with the Bank Street College of Education, focused on the early childhood workforce over the course of the summer. My name is Dan Wuori. I am the Senior Director of Early Learning Institute. For those who may be joining us for the first time, the Institute is celebrating its 21st year of service to governors and state lawmakers and other senior state elected leaders. We're an education policy resource to those state leaders, covering the full education spectrum, early childhood through K-12 and on into higher education and workforce. But on our early effort series, we are focused on the early part of that continuum, prenatal to age 8. And in particular today, we're going to talk about the needs of the early childhood workforce. As I mentioned, I'm glad to have you with us. We've got a fantastic panel that has joined us today. And before I introduce them, I want to introduce you to Emily Sharop of Bank Street College of Education, who is going to kind of co-host and co-moderate with me. Emily, it's great to be with us.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks to everyone at the Hunt Institute for having us today. For 100 years, Bank Street has focused on how children learn, what teachers need to help children succeed, and how learners of every age can reach their full potential. As we all know, a significant period of brain development takes place from birth to age 3. During that time, developmentally meaningful interactions and experiences build the foundation for all future learning and relationships. At the same time, we recognize that most infant toddler educators lack access to high quality degree or credential programs that recognize their existing skills and also deepen their practice. Unfortunately, many systems don't value the deep cultural knowledge that our diverse workforce brings to their craft. Truly valuing and recognizing these strengths is a key equity issue and should be a priority of any higher education or preparation program. Many institutes of higher ed are also not experienced in working with the incumbent workforce, and few bring deep expertise in the earliest years of infant toddler development to their curriculum. These are all difficult challenges that have also been exacerbated by the pandemic, but there are exciting bright spots that we wish to highlight in this series. And today we look forward to hearing from our panel of experts about concrete ways to enhance learning opportunities for early educators to address issues of equity in the field. Our hope is that this inspires higher ed and state system leaders alike to devise programs that aren't just business as usual, but are carefully crafted to design access to programs that will make a difference for all of our educators and our youngest children. And I want to thank the Hunt Institute for organizing this series together with Bank Street. We hope that together we can raise awareness about the needs and opportunities for stronger investment in our early care and education workforce.
Emily, thank you so much. I want to introduce the rest of the panel. Margie Brickley is faculty on the Infant and Family Development and Early Intervention program at the Bank Street College of Education. Margie, thanks for being with us. Cathy Main is the Director of Early Childhood Education, a senior lecturer, program coordinator in the MED program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dr. Stacey French-Lee is clinical assistant professor and child development program executive director in the Department of Early Childhood and Elementary Education at Georgia State University. And Tara Henriquez is Senior Program Development Manager, Early Care and Education at the Early Care and Education Pathways to Success, ESEP's program. It is great to have all of you with us. Thanks for taking the time to join and participate in this conversation. I want to just by way of housekeeping mention a couple of things. First off, all of our early effort webinars are closed captioned. And so if that is a service that you would find useful, you can find the closed captioned settings down in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Please do avail yourself of that. This may be helpful. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we will be taking questions from you later in the hour. So please do give some thought to what you'd like to ask the panel as well. And later in the hour, we'll pull from those. We would ask if you are going to pose a question, use the Q&A function down at the bottom of the Zoom screen rather than the chat function. The chat can sometimes go very quickly and get filled up. So the Q&A section will help us to keep track of what's a question versus what is just a great conversation. Of the hour. So with that, why don't we dig in? Let's talk a little bit about the early childhood programs. I think Margie, we want to begin with you. You serve, as I mentioned, as a faculty member for the Infant and Family Development and Early Intervention at Bank Street College of Education. In your career, you have supported a wide range of infant toddler educators, in particular graduate students earning a master's degree, as well as family child care providers earning CDAs and others. Talk a little bit from your perspective about what do we need to understand about the needs and the strengths of this workforce to inform effective credentials and other professional learning programs, this special population of our workforce.
Well, thank you for inviting me and for having me today. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. I think that before we even think about the needs and strengths of this workforce, we need to think about and understand the essential work that people who work with very young children are doing. There's a wonderful quote in the book Illuminating Care that says, child care equals education. The pedagogy of care dissolves the false dichotomy that there's a split between early care and education. In the past, caring may have been viewed as a minimum standard of keeping a child safe and clean, or as something anyone could do. But in the emerging future, caring is viewed as an intentional teaching practice that connects us to one another and requires specialized knowledge about children, about learning, growth, and human development. And I think that quote kind of captures the essential work that we think about when we think about working with very young children and their families. We have a class that is an environments class at the graduate level, and it's probably not until session 4 that we ever talk about the physical environment, because we spend the first 4 sessions talking about the adults in the space as being the essential quality of an environment, and how those adults are the ones who are going to set the tone. And so I think understanding that first is really important for this work. Another thing I think we need to carefully consider is whether other models of professional learning programs are relevant in this youngest age group, or for the teachers of this youngest age group. Isolated and scattered trainings, for example, may not be the best way to build this workforce, whereas in other areas of the profession, it might be something that you would want to do, but in this particular segment of the workforce, it's not something that has been as effective. And just thinking about the expectations we have for this segment of the workforce as well, and things like, providing curriculum or expecting people to use and meet curricular models, again, might not be the best way to approach this section of the workforce. I think the strengths, as Emily alluded to, are that the workforce often tends to be culturally consistent with the families. We often have people with many years of experience who really love working with this age group, who really love the youngest children. They're not trying to work their way up into elementary school. They really want to be where they are with the birth to 5 folks. What I've seen in all segments of this workforce is a huge capacity for growth and change, a curiosity that drives their work. And specifically, because we're working with such young children, a real interest in a family-based model and thinking about the families alongside thinking about the children. And that's challenging. Anybody who's a teacher will tell you that that's one of the most challenging parts of doing the work often is interactions with families. But we've shown in some of the models that we've developed that that's one of the areas where we saw the biggest growth was in the connection to families that people were interested in making and willing to make. I think for their needs, that what we've discovered is that there's a real need for a learning community and for people to function in learning communities, grounding in the ways to learn more about the children and families and their care, and bridges between beliefs and values. So people come in with their beliefs and values, and the younger the children, the more primal our responses are, right? When we hear a baby cry, our brains light up and our brains say, move, do something. Don't let the baby keep crying. So the younger the children, the more our responses are kind of baked in to us. And so we all have beliefs and values that are associated with those responses. And so the more we can do to bridge those beliefs and values towards expectations, towards some openness to maybe some new ways of thinking or new ways of understanding, the better it is. And so we found in our models that creating those bridges can help people to navigate and not feel like they're betraying their home culture or they're betraying their belief and value system by interacting with children in a way that supports children's growth. And then I think the last piece I would say is making sure that there's an effective design. The design that values reflective practice. We know from our work at Bank Street and the research that's been done on the Bank Street model that reflective practice equals longevity in the field. And with the younger the children, the higher the turnover rate. So the more we can keep people in the field by reflective practice, because the reflective practice turns you into more of a problem solver and allows you to not spend your time blaming people, but spend your time finding solutions. And that's really essential when the children are biting each other and all the other wonderful things that happen in the environments for young children. I think another part of the effective design is to really amplify the voices of the learners and to have our have our programs be relationship-based, so that all of our learning is done in a relationship-based model. I'll stop there.
Margie, thank you. So many rich things to unpack here. Very well said. I want to turn, Cathy, maybe to you. In terms of producing great outcomes for children from early childhood programs, we know that the teachers need access to education, but there are often barriers that this workforce faces. I know as the director of the early childhood program there at the University of Illinois at Chicago, you have helped to sort of navigate some of the challenges that providers may face with things like entrance exams or financial aid, or kind of even just navigating the bureaucracy of transferring credits from one institution to another across the program. Talk about some of the barriers that the early childhood workforce faces to accessing these kinds of credentialing programs, and how have you created solutions to them as you're working to promote really equitable access to these opportunities for the workforce?
Wow, thank you, Dan, for that question, and thank you for including me on this panel. I'm actually really excited to be here today and follow Margie. Wow, that was such a great kickoff. and such an important foundation for us to be thinking about this work. So I actually really appreciate this question because it sort of attempts to separate the difference between the bureaucratic barriers and actually the real barriers. And at risk of sounding flippant, the real barrier is that they are members of the incumbent early childhood workforce. And so, you know, the first thing that comes to mind is that they work. So folks who are working, you know, perhaps 40 plus hours a week, some actually work additional jobs on top of that. And many of them have other responsibilities to their families and their community. So obviously working is not an insurmountable barrier, you know, to support people to increase their educational attainment, but then also being part of the early childhood workforce. They're part of a context and they work in a field that is just significantly undervalued and underfunded. And so that creates additional real authentic barriers. You know, the lack of funding in our public early childhood system overall creates a situation where we lack the resources that we actually need to provide the true cost of care. And then that filters down when we don't have the right resources into a compensation problem. So we don't have the money to pay people to do the work, the very complex work that Margie described is what's required to be done. And so instead, what we have is we have a system of a lot of people trying really, really hard to do something about it. But it's multiple systems and multiple funding sources. And so with these multiple systems and funding sources, we have a very fragmented system. So not only are you working and in many ways overworked and undercompensated, when you do attempt to go back to school and we look at a pathway for you, we're going to be looking at something that looks like courses all over the place. Our early childhood workforce has what we call some college everywhere. And often it's classes that they've taken at multiple institutions at different times that don't always add up to the correct credentials that might be required. There's barriers to move to, you know, teacher licensure around testing that some of them have not had opportunity and access to do. So it was sort of with that lens that we started thinking about, what does this mean about equitable access? And so when we started designing the program, that we were really thinking about is we want to really attend to these inherent injustices that we see across the early childhood workforce. So we want to pay a lot of attention to those kinds of things that are happening, and then really start to design a program from admissions through practicum experiences, through the summative assessments that you're required to do, that were responsive in thinking about justice for these women. And I say these women, I'm talking about, that's our workforce. It's mostly women, and in many communities, it's mostly women of color. And I felt that if we could design something that really attended to equity for them and thought about what it is that they need, we might move a step forward. So I'll share three things because there's been lots of little things that have happened, but there's sort of, when you have that foundation that we started with, I think all the little bureaucratic logistical barriers sort of can get battled because you have this wider view of equity and justice. So the first thing that we recognize that needs to be done is partnering. For anyone to have any assumption that one institution can do this on their own, or one agency or anyone, is completely false. I was fortunate enough to find many, many like-minded folks in our community who wanted to come together to think about how could we really design a scholarship, how could we design a program that was actually had this whole idea of justice at its root. So I've partnered with people ranging from a state senator to people who work at government agencies to people in different, you know, programs, community-based programs. I partner with faculty and Department of Psychology, you know, people who do different things to sort of get this done. The other point that I think was really important is actually, and I think Margie mentioned this, our incumbent workforce has so many strengths. And you actually have to honor those strengths. You can't just give lip service to it. I found a lot of everyone's always talking like, oh, we want to recruit and retain a diverse workforce. I'm like, well, we already have a very diverse, rich workforce. Think about what it is that we can do to support the existing workforce grow and have access to education. And I think we all know, we've seen all the research of how important it is to have a teacher that is reflective of the children and families that they're serving. So we have to privilege that you have something that we think that the research tells us is the most important. The research does not tell us that having a 3.8 from Brown University is what makes you a great early childhood teacher. So we have to really privilege what we know is what's really happening. So that was a starting point right there. And then we started to look at, wow, the strengths of this workforce also includes, not that they're just of and from the communities and they reflect the children and families, but their wisdom. And again, Margie alluded to this. They have years of experience, and those years of experience do translate into wisdom. And it's important knowledge and skills that they have. And that just absolutely has to be valued. And what also accompanied that wisdom is this tenacity and this perseverance and true commitment to working with children and families. And so that was a good, let's prioritize that. That's what we look for. When we admit people into our program, the theme that we're looking for is your commitment, okay? And how long you've lived in this community, how long you've been part of this community. So once we started thinking about that, it was really easy to say, I'm gonna fight for the fact that, you got a C in this course 20 years ago, and now they're not counting it towards licensure. That is not going to happen. And I'm going to fight for the fact that, yes, you do need a course in observation and assessment of young children. We think that's really important. Those are technical skills and competencies you have to have. But no, you do not have to take intro to early childhood care and ed because you've been introing and you've been in earlier. It's just ridiculous, some of these rules. So then all of those kind of barriers start to just fall by the side, and they make the things that it makes it really easy to fight for. And so that is sort of a framework of building off of it. And I know I'm probably running out of time here, but I want to add one more thing that we did, and that is the support structures. And often people think of the support structures of the logistical things a test prep, right? Of course. If you have to take a standardized test and you have been out of school for a long time and you're not trained on taking a standardized test, well, then we can figure out how to give you a really great test prep course to get you to pass the test. We can also get funding for you so you can take the test multiple times, because actually the more you take the test, the more likely you are to pass. Transfer and articulation policies, we work with our state to actually have policies where we can say, hey, this person does not have this class. Child, family, and community, what we think, but they've actually been the family sports specialists at their school for 25 years. So we think that they have, and so working around to try to fix those things. And of course, financial resources are incredibly important because the field is so undercompensated. And financial resources that look at the full cost of attendance, because there's fees, there's books, there's transportation, there's childcare. But the other support service we really did, and Margie brought this up, and I wrote down your word, Margie, because I thought it's the design of our program. So a lot of efforts have sometimes been made to think about okay, we can fix this by chunking it and doing modules and having people come online and, go take a class here and a section there and whatever. And we found that really what works is a design that is professional learning communities, where folks actually come together and they reflect. Margie brought this up too, and they have multiple opportunities to reflect on their teaching. Because if we ultimately, the goal of providing pathways for the incumbent workforce is to make them a better teacher, and to then improve the outcomes for children and families. And if we're only doing a program where they, click a button online to say, I did this, I did that, and I read that or whatever, I'm just not sure if we're reaching that goal of actually making them a better teacher. And in our program, we do lots and lots of videotaping, lots of reflection, and they literally, I call it lift up the curtain on your teaching in order to grow, in order to learn more, in order to be a better teacher. And we use, again, like I said, the professional learning community structure, and we use reflective supervision as our coaching model. So I will, I'll stop there because I think that was a mouthful, but happy to share more in another question.
Terrific, Cathy, thank you. A reminder that in just a couple minutes, we will turn things over to some of your questions as well. So we've got several questions already in the Q&A, but I would invite you to plug in more as you're hearing from our panelists today. And Tara, I'm excited to turn to you. You know, in addition to the kind of traditional credentialing programs that I think, you know, often spring to mind as we're talking about the workforce, I think apprenticeships is a pathway that is getting more and more interest and attention. And I know that in your role at Early Care and Education Pathways to Success, you help to support these types of job-embedded apprenticeships. So talk a little bit more about the power of programs like these, and why are they kind of uniquely suited to the early childhood?
Yes, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. ESEPS is our short way of saying our long name, and I've been working for ESEPS for several years, and we focused in on apprenticeships because of the amount of resources that are available currently. We see the governor of California has actually put a goal of you know, hundreds of thousands of new apprentices in the coming years. And we've also heard this from the federal government. So apprenticeships are really great because they provide a packaged way of getting our folks through all their requirements, but in a successful way. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that in a moment. But I just wanted to preface it by saying at ESEPS, we've been involved in creating ECE apprenticeships in the state of California. We also been involved in field building so that others can create these apprenticeships, because we found them to be such a wonderful way to get the workforce what they need, that we'd like others to be able to do it. And we've also been advocating for change because, as you know, we heard a little bit of allusion to, there are certain structural systems in place that make this work very challenging. Not the least of which is the compensation that we see in the field. But even beyond that, you know, getting funding for these kinds of efforts and removing other structural barriers. But we truly believe at ESEPS that well-prepared teachers do lead to better outcomes for children. And so that is really our focus, is better outcomes for children ultimately. Right now, we are a registered apprenticeship sponsor. We have 4 types of apprenticeships. So we prepare teachers at the associate teacher level. We also have another apprenticeship at the teacher level for ECE teachers, family childcare, and we also do home visiting. So right now we currently have 13 different cohorts in 8 counties. We have 218 active apprentices, and those include both new workers and incumbent workers. We're at 12 different colleges and have quite a few different employers. So you know, we've been doing this work for about 7 years now, and we've really seen an explosion. We do see that the apprenticeships really focus the needs on the employer. So that is something that, you know, when I first came to the work, I really do appreciate that. We go in and talk to the employers. What is it that you need? We know there's a great shortage right now of ECE workers. They're really, really struggling. And at the same time, you know, we're requiring more and more professional qualifications of our workers, courses and degrees and so forth, while not necessarily providing them the funding and supports to do that. As I think we've heard alluded to, you know, that the ECE workforce is already stressed because they're working, and they're oftentimes from low-income communities earning a low wage, at least at the beginning of their careers. It's really difficult for them to take time off to go to school. They're juggling family responsibilities. Many of them have already families. They're first-time college students. They may be immigrants. So struggling with a lot of things, even the language. So what we've done with our apprentices is we have a pre-established set of coursework in the apprenticeship program that they're in, that they go through as a cohort. All the courses are free to them. In addition, as part of the apprenticeship, they have on-the-job training. So that will include a professional development that the employers feel is needed. It's of course the work experience. They have to be paid a wage as they're doing their work experience. So they're not working as volunteers. And they have a mentor, or what's called in the apprenticeship world, a journeyman. So they're getting a real full, complete package of preparation, and they're being paid at the same time, which I think is really the magic of apprenticeship. They don't have to navigate all the systems. It's all being done with them. As a group, they go through and they have assigned people. We usually have a success coordinator that is there for the group. We have embedded tutors, so quite a lot of support. And the other thing about registered apprenticeships that we found is really wonderful is that when you have that structure, that registered apprenticeship, you can tap into workforce dollars. So when I was in the ECE world, we were trying to do professional development and giving stipends and so forth. But now we've always had this dream with our founder, Dr. Randy Wolf, of how do we get to those workforce dollars? Because our workforce is crucial. We have a shortage of this in this field, and we're supporting all the other workers in the country. So it really makes sense. We need an investment here into our workforce in order that others can go to work. So we've been able to successfully do that, tap into these workforce dollars and get large grants that are geared toward apprenticeships. And we also found that coursework at the community college level could be offered for free if it's done as a registered apprenticeship, which was a wonderful thing. And we've also been able to get many of the supports in our programs for free because of tapping into these systems. So I think, all the things that were already mentioned have been really crucial in our apprenticeship programs and accommodating the coursework to the schedule of the ECE worker. So they're taking courses on evenings and weekends. They're taking them in a cohort group. So they build that peer network, which I think is probably number one for getting them through the program successfully. They really bond. And I know we had one FCC program where they actually told one of the ladies in our program, she said, I don't know if I can do this. And they said, oh, yes, you are. You're doing it. And they pulled them through, and they were calling each other and working together on assignments. So we found that really is crucial. Also, the fact that when they finish the program, most of the time, as an apprentice, you go in and you have a job at the end of your program, so it's not like they're out looking for work. And of course, the financial benefit of everything being free. We even get books and laptops and all these things for free for our participants. So I would say that's my answer on that. Thank you.
That's exciting. I'm going to turn things over to Emily here in just a minute for a couple of other questions. But before we do, I want to bring Dr. French-Lee into the conversation as well. Dr. Lee, we, at Georgia State University, you are involved in a program that I know has some really fantastic results in terms of retention within the program that are not common necessarily across all early childhood programs. Talk to us a little bit about what do you feel like is distinct about the program there at Georgia State that is really supporting teachers and teacher candidates in terms of not only entering the field, but staying in the field? And how does this approach maybe promote equity as well?
Sure. Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here today to join in this conversation. So Georgia State University and our Birth Through 5 program have systems in place that help support non-traditional and working students, which we have found to be critical for recruitment and retention. Most of our students are currently working in the field of early childhood and early care and education. So, for instance, Georgia State has a success initiative, which provides comprehensive social, academic, and financial advisement. We track and support students who, they may come up flagged if they're having problems financially or academically. We also have retention grants that are automatically applied to students' accounts who have encountered financial hardships. Also, our Birth Through 5 program specifically is designed for students to allow them to remain employed in early care and education programs while also taking courses. And very importantly, they are able to complete their practicum hours in the classrooms where they work. We have hybrid classes, face-to-face and online blended. We have some classes that are fully online. Our Birth Through 5 classes are all offered later in the evening for working students. Also, in my dual role as a professor in our early childhood and elementary education program and as the executive director of our 2 campus child care centers, I have the opportunity to provide real-time, practical, current educational practices for students. So for instance, the courses I teach often meet in one of our campus centers so that students can go into classrooms and observation rooms during class time to deepen their understanding of the topics that we are covering. So it's real-life practical application. One of the distinctive approaches that I take in all of my teaching that I think goes toward retention of our staff, of our students, is that no matter what courses I'm teaching, I have encouraged, the students have been encouraged to stay in the field as we have kind of focused on this trilemma of quality, cost, and compensation. And so I really focus on how, no matter the course, how they as professionals can be advocates and activists in regard to the trilemma. And so once they fully know and understand the problems, they can fully identify and fully understand the problems the field has historically faced. And then they find out about how they can play a major role in bringing about change. Their commitment to the field grows. We work on developing their critical consciousness as early care and education providers, and to think about the inequities built into the system, to apply a critical lens to so many ideals related to early care and education. Another distinctive approach is that we prepare teachers to work in a wide range of settings. So they're not only coming in to learn to work as classroom teachers or to continue to develop their practices as classroom teachers, but also as administrators. One of the courses I teach is organization and administration of early care and education programs. And so even if that's great for teachers who want to be administrators, but even if they don't want to be administrators, the topics and the content covered in that course really helps teachers who are going to remain in the classroom to really understand how the centers work, how this administration, the decisions that are made, how they're made, how budgeting decisions are made. That really helps them to understand more about their profession. So we also work on, we focus on preparing teachers to help develop skills for people who want to work in state agencies as family child care providers. So just a wide range of industry. Finally, I will say that our emphasis on culturally responsive and equity-centered education, not only in preparing teacher candidates to be culturally responsive and equitable, but also to model this for students, is a distinctive element of our program. We approach and we teach about childhood as a social construction, and we understand that childhood is not universal. Children experience childhood differently based on their intersecting identities. And given that the majority of our students are Black women, it is important for us that we model for them culturally responsive engagement, and that this engagement builds upon these teachers' cultural and linguistic capital and tools. It's important for us to teach about and understand how our students are often marginalized themselves in society based on the intersection of their race and gender, which really frankly has a lot to do with why and how they are often undervalued as professionals. So I think that those things that I just kind of highlighted there are really ways that we have been able to support our teachers, keep them in the field, and really focusing on developing their critical consciousness, focusing on equity, justice in the field, and to push back against ideals about this neutrality of childcare or childcare experiences, and to think about children's intersecting identities as we're preparing, as we're using certain curricular models. Think about what is it, being a child does not mean the same thing. It's a different experience being a Black girl than being a Black boy, than being a white like gender fluid child. So childhood means different things for different people, and not just going in saying that it means the same thing for everybody. And that light bulb goes off in the student's head. They go, that's why I haven't been successful. I thought that all children are the same. Treat everybody the same. Let's do the same thing for everybody. And so that really, to me, has been how we have been able to really support students to stay in the field. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. These are incredibly rich points everyone has made. As we think about the new approaches to the workforce that everyone has talked about, we also need to keep in mind our mixed delivery system and the significant number of family child care providers in the field. And our approach needs to take into account that very unique context. So I'm wondering how you all think about designing approaches to degrees and credentials that adapt to the unique needs of family child care providers. Margie, let's begin with you, and then others please chime in.
I think that one of the important things is not to be wed to the practices of the past and to think creatively about how to maximize the experience and the knowledge and the cultural context that family child care providers bring. I mean, I've met family child care providers that definitely have a PhD in early childhood and education and care, even though they don't formally have one from any university. And I think that I was recently talking to a colleague who was doing some credentialing work and said that she read the written description that the person had turned in, and then she went to watch this person teach, and this person was an amazing teacher. And the written description and the teaching were very, very different. Her experience of them were very different. And so we need to think about, so are there other ways that provider, and certainly many family child care providers are comfortable writing and communicating in written form, but some of them are not. And so how are we incorporating that into our approaches at all levels, probably not just for family child care providers, but for everyone as well. And I think that another thing is, because we're dealing with often experienced folks, one of the things that we can think about is, how do we maximize the choices that we're giving? We've heard other people talking about how how important it is to be sure that we're not making people take things that are a repetition of what they've lived. And so those maximizing the choices in that way, I think, is important. And then finally, I think we have to, as people are saying, we have to really value our family child care providers as humans, not just as people who we want to go out and do something, not to use them as tools to help children and families and improve the workforce, but to value them for the people that they are and design programs that make them or have them feel how valued they are by the people who are working with them.
Stacey, did you want to add something?
I would just hop in and say that in some of the same ways that we've adapted for providers who work in center-based programs, like allowing them to complete some practicum hours in their family child care settings under the supervision of university personnel, is one important way. And then also designing some of our university courses that speak directly to the unique context of the family child care is another important way that we could support family child care providers and really speak to their unique context.
I could just add in there that we've been successful with our FCC providers, mostly because we provide that cohort model. They really do support one another. The other thing is that we have been able to offer courses in Spanish. I think that so many of our FCCs are immigrants, and they really want to study, but they're much more comfortable in their own language. And a recent study in California that found that 75% of FCCs match the background of the children that they're serving, and that includes the language. So it's so important to prepare them, even if they do speak another language. And we've also been successful in having professors kind of adapt assignments so that they can fit it into their work life. For example, instead of a huge project due on, at the end of the term, breaking it up into smaller assignments, things like that, that just make it more doable.
Great.
I think, and also bringing content, small business content as well, and acknowledging that that's a big part of their lives, is that they're business people.
Thank you. Well, before turning to some of the questions that are coming in on the Q&A, I do want to ask a question about systems and policy. As I hear all of you speak, I think about our need to scale access to the kinds of programs and opportunities that all of you are describing. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the changes that are needed in the conditions that enable programs like the ones you all are running to grow and address the historic and pervasive inequities in our field. What can policymakers and system leaders do to change the environment that will support both higher ed and early educators to pursue these pathways? And Stacey, I loved your discussion of the trilemma. I think that captures a lot of these conditions in a nutshell. So if you want to start, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think that as a member of NACCE's governing board, I will say that I believe that NACCE has laid out a plan that I think, with their unifying framework and the work that they've done a good job of developing a plan, developing what the field needs. And I think one of the ways is that we can make sure that, I'm wondering how many people, when I talk about the advocacy and the activism I teach my teachers in those classrooms about, I wonder how many students know about this unifying framework. Like, are we exposing them to that? Are we exposing workers in the field to that? So knowing about the unifying framework, and also to really teaching about advocacy, that we need federally funded early care and education that is available, accessible, and affordable for all families, and that it is a social justice issue. And so we need to approach it from that way. It's not just about care, about where people put their children during the day. It's about justice and equity. Who can afford to be in these quality settings? If we say that brain development, all that we've learned about brain development in the early years, but who really has access to these environments where they have opportunities to learn in certain settings, in certain ways, with developmentally appropriate practices and, high quality care, who can afford to put their children there? So we're already at very, very early times saying that we're starting some children out already in marginalized positions. So I think that we have to really think about how we prepare people to press the government, come together, use our individual agency and our collective agency to press policymakers and system leaders to get behind the unified framework and other ways that we are thinking about tackling this trilemma.
I think also we need to have the policy folks and people who are designing legislation or funding systems. They need to trust the field and they need to trust the communities. These systems shouldn't look the same in every single location. This kind of one size fits all doesn't work. And so figuring out ways that we can maximize the knowledge in the field and not make people who've gone to a university, gone to a program, a program that is well respected, not to have them have to jump through extra hoops because we don't trust that the people in the field have done a good enough job. I think we really need to trust the field.
I think that's trust the field, Margie. I think that is key. Trust the field.
In our work advocating for the field and for workforce development, one of the things we find ourselves spending a lot of time on is reducing the barriers that are just in the system itself. So whether that be accessing the workforce development funds, which are oftentimes, I wouldn't say siloed, but they're separated out. And so that you have to really sit down and spend hours and hours collaborating together in order to make it work. Another thing is for the community college system, you know, they're wonderful partners, but they're very stressed out right now with the pandemic. And they also have the same issue, you know, your child development faculty may never have spoken to the career technical ed folks. So it's really like part of our role has been sitting down and having people speak to one another. But even when we do that, a lot of times we find that they're not aware of funding sources available, or it's so bureaucratic in order to get to that funding source that people give up. So I think anything we can do to just make things more of a package deal where the worker can just walk in and everything's free for them. There's a path, it's easy. It needs to be easy. They have a hard enough life as it is.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to add one thing that won't surprise you, and it sort of builds on what everyone says. This early childhood system itself has to be funded and fixed. The problems that we're having with the workforce is just a response to the fact that we really have a dysfunctional early childhood system and an underfunded system. But I like fix the field. I also want to add follow the science and use the science. It's frustrating to me that we still have this false dichotomy between care and education as if they exist separately and they're funded separately and they're valued separately. So I would definitely want to add follow the science to that. And then this was also brought up, we have to address the capacity issue in higher ed. It's yes, our friends in community colleges and us in the 4-year programs too, we're stretched incredibly thin in trying to be responsive and developing programs to meet the multiple needs of this workforce. And that has to be included also in any kind of solution. And I would also encourage continuing to do really robust program evaluation. So the programs like what Stacey described, and I know Tara's program and our program at UIC, students are staying in and they're staying in the field. And so like we need to know what that is and be continuing to build programs off of that.
Cathy, you raised a couple of points there that lead really nicely into some of the audience Q&A. Kate is asking a question about what research is needed to evaluate the effectiveness of these different career pathways.
So I think probably the most important research in looking at these is robust program evaluation. So we need to really see what's happening, who is coming into the programs, who's staying in the programs, and what are the elements of the program that are really supporting the students to stay in it. And I go back to what Margie said, the design. I have some concerns that we could be moving to in an effort to elevate the workforce and increase their degrees and their credentials, that we could be moving to a design that is not necessarily the design that's going to really improve their teaching and improve outcomes for children and families. So I think we need to look at program evaluation.
Yeah, building on that, somebody commented or asked a question about the gap between what's being taught in courses and what's happening in the field, and to Stacey's point as well, being advocates, but also we have to teach teachers how to be subversive. If you are in a program that is not doing the right thing by children, you have to figure out a way how to pretend you're going along, but in your heart and in your practice, you're supporting children and families in the way that is the right way to do it.
Well, we are getting near the top of the hour. We always like to end these conversations on a positive note. So let me throw out one question. Maybe we can get a brief response from each of you. As we look ahead, what is your greatest hope for the early childhood workforce? Maybe Tara, can we begin with you?
Sure. I think my greatest hope is just more of what I see blossoming right now, at least in my own context in California, which are accessible and free pathways to education for the ECE workforce, so they don't have to struggle.
Fantastic. Stacey, you want to jump in?
I would say that my greatest hope is that this quality, cost, and compensation trilemma is resolved, and that childcare, early care, and education is available, accessible, and affordable for all families, and that families have choices, have a wide range of choices and options for their early care and education for their children.
Fantastic. Margie, please.
All of that. And I think I'd like to highlight the need for compensation to be connected to the value of the work that's being provided. There is no greater work than the work that people are doing to support children and families from the beginning. It creates a pathway for life that is really essential and necessary. And so the compensation should match that.
Cathy, we'll give you the last word.
Oh, that's going to be tough because all of everything, you know, and I can't say how important I think is that we really truly fund early childhood systems for the true cost of care, and that hopefully will help and all. But I also hope is that we do recognize the brilliance of the women who work in this field and their commitment and perseverance, and really honor them and privilege them and hold them up as the incredible community leaders that they are.
Couldn't say it any better than that. I want to thank all of our panel this afternoon. Margie Brickley of Bank Street College of Education, Cathy Main of the University of Illinois at Chicago, Dr. Stacey French-Lee of Georgia State University, and Tara Henriquez of ESEPS, the Early Care and Education Pathways to Success. I know, and also want to thank you, Emily, and the team at Bank Street. I think one of the things that Emily and I know that maybe not everybody else does is that this summer series, which we will do each month this summer, has been a lot of work behind the scenes by a special brain trust. So I want to thank Becca Hanlon of the Hunt Institute and Lily Rosenthal of Bank Street, who have been really responsible for bringing this panel together today and really helping to staff and bring together this entire series. We're looking forward to being back together with you in both July and August. July, I think we'll drop the registration link into the chat. July 13th, we'll be back together again to talk about the workforce. We're going to be talking about addressing the compensation crisis. So innovative ideas to sustainably support providers will be the July conversation, again on July 13th. And then on August 9th, we'll be back for a conversation about strengthening systems, embedding equity when defining quality. So this should be a fantastic panel, and we are really looking forward to this series all summer long. I did want to also just mention quickly on June 22nd, I dropped in the chat a link. We're going to have a special event. We have been partnered at the Hunt Institute over the past 8 months, a year maybe, with a number of organizational partners, the Education Trust, the Century Foundation, and Education Alliance's Manny Cantor Center, which is a wonderful community-based program on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in New York City, working on an issue brief that will be released sometime later this month on how to help promote diversity and inclusion in all of its many forms in preschool classrooms. We will be coming together with those partners on June 22nd for a special event, a 2-hour event focused on how to help to promote diversity in preschool classrooms. A lot of times it doesn't get the attention that it deserves, but preschool classrooms continue to be among the most segregated early childhood settings, racially, ethnically, income-wise, in terms of children with special needs. The list goes on, and we'll be talking about that on the 22nd. So I hope that you will take the time, and if that works out for your schedule, that you'll recognize and register for all of those programs. Panelists, what a treat to be with you today. Thank you for taking the time out. Emily, what a great partnership, and we're looking forward to July and August.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all of you
Great.
for taking time out of your busy schedule to watch us this afternoon. We will be back with you, and we'll see you in July, if not before. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.